So fall has just started, or autumn if you're in the UK, and the leaves have started to turn yellow and fall from the trees. So that means it's a sad time because it's the end of the summer, but it also means it's a great time because we can start making one of my favourite dishes, and that's a meat pie. And today we're going to make probably the greatest meat pie of them all. We're going to make a steak and ale pie. And it looks like we've got a fair few ingredients here, but really it's not. Most of these are just a few spices. But what you do need to make this steak and ale pie is obviously some steak, and we're using chuck steak. You could use fancy steak if you wanted to, but you don't need to because we're going to cook this for a long time, so it's going to be very tender. And usually what you find is your cheaper cuts of meat have got some fat in there, and that's going to give us a lot of flavour. And you obviously need some ale. Now, I'm going to be using the greatest ale of them all, which is Timothy Taylors Landlord. And I know over in the States, if you're trying to make that, you're going to struggle to get hold of it. I get this imported when my son Harry comes to visit. If you're in the UK, you could use a black sheep ale also. But if you're in the States, something like, you can get Boddingtons, which would be a really good substitute. You can also maybe use something like a Founders All Day IPA because that's not too hoppy, but you want a dark beer anyway. So you want around about 2.5 pounds, which is 1.2 kilos of chuck steak. You want a bottle, which is 500 millilitres, or 1 pint, which is 20 fluid ounces of beer. You need 2 medium-sized onions chopped, 2 cloves of garlic finely chopped, 4 ounces of carrots chopped, 2 tablespoons of oil to fry the steak in, some salt and pepper, some English mustard. If you can't get English mustard, I would, maybe you could use a Dijon and maybe use a little bit more. Salt and pepper, as I said, and 3 tablespoons of all-purpose or plain flour. So let's see what we have to do to get this meat into the either the slow cooker or the oven, whichever method you're going to use. Let's see what we've got to do to get this pie filling ready and make a great pie. We want to take our steak and we want to cut out any large lumps of fat. We don't want that in there really, and we want to cut the steak into cubes about between a half an inch and an inch in size. And this meat, as I say, it's going to be going into the either the oven or a crock pot for a couple of hours. So it doesn't have to be uniform in size. Something round about that is going to be great because this is a chunky meat pie we're making. So I didn't lose too much. That were very lean cut of meat really. That's about all the fat that I could get out of that. So I started off with around about 3 pounds of meat, which is probably 1.5 kilos of meat, and I've probably not lost that much. So I'm going to have a little bit more, but you want to end up with around about 2.5 pounds, which is 1.2 kilos of steak. Next thing to do is to fry our chopped steak a little bit at a time. You can't cook it all at once unless you've got a massive pan. So into a frying pan you want to put about a teaspoon of oil. You can use whichever type of oil you want. To my preference is olive oil. And as I say, a little bit at a time, probably 2 handfuls at a time. We're gonna fry this. You don't want to overload the pan. And you're not frying this to cook this. You're just frying it to put a little bit of colour on there. You don't get any flavour without colour, so we don't want to put this straight into the crock pot. We need to fry it up first. So that's what I'm talking about. We want some colour on this meat. It's nowhere near cooked, but That colour is going to add some real depth of flavour to the pie. So when your first batch of meat has got colour on it, that can go to either your pan or to your crock pot. Two options on how you're going to cook your meat. You can either put it into a normal pan and cook it in the oven at 150 Celsius, which is 300 Fahrenheit, for around about 2 hours. Or you can do what I'm going to do, and you can put it into a slow cooker or a crock pot, and it'll be a similar sort of time, 2 to 3 hours. Either way, all you want to achieve is that the meat should be really tender. So whichever you want to do, pan or crock pot, it's your choice. Last few bits of meat just browning off. Don't worry if you've made a little bit of a messier pan like this. We're going to add a little bit of beer to that and deglaze that. That's all flavour, we're not throwing that away. So now we've cooked the meat and we've deglazed the pan. And there we have it. That's the pie filling ready to go on the heat, crock pot or oven, and it'll take about 2 hours if you do it in the oven, which you'll want to put on, as I say, at 150, which is 300 Fahrenheit, 150 Celsius, 300 Fahrenheit. It'll take a bit longer if you use a crock pot. While your meat is in your pan or your crock pot, you can make the pastry. And this is quite a large pie, so we're going to make a larger quantity of pastry. So we need 600 grams of plain or all-purpose flour, and you can either make this by hand, rubbing the butter and the flour together, or you can do what I'm going to do, and you can cheat a little bit and put it into a food processor. So 600 grams of flour. And then you want 300 grams of cold butter, and you want to cut your butter up into small chunks or slices. So if you're going to make this, the pastry by hand, you would put your flour and butter together, then you just rub it through your fingers until it resembles fine breadcrumbs. But if you use a processor, it's a little bit quicker. And then we want to start to add some cold water. So this has been in the fridge for a little while, and you maybe want to add 5 tablespoons to start with. And then just stir that with the spoon, and you'll see it'll start to come together. about 2 in. And once you get your pastry into a ball like this, you want to gently, but only a little bit, you gently want to knead it until it starts to, you'll feel it start to just stiffen up a little bit. But you don't overdo it because we're not making bread, so you don't want to release all the gluten in the flour, otherwise that's exactly what we'll have. We'll have bready, tough pastry, and that's the last thing we want. We want soft, crumbly pastry. That's starting to hold together now. Rather than break up when I squash it, it's starting to mould into shape. So I'm going to say that's about done. So what I normally do now is I normally take 1/3, that's for the lid, for the top, and then 2/3, that's for the base. They want to go into some cling film and then back into the fridge. Pastry done. So now comes the fun bit. We're going to roll the pastry, make the pie. So to do that you need some flour to flour your work surface, a rolling pin obviously, some beaten egg to seal the edges and to brush onto the top. So you need to take your pastry out of the fridge about 20 minutes before you want to roll it, otherwise it'd be just a bit too hard. And we're going to attempt to roll it into a circle so we can line our pie dish. So this is a 23 centimetre diameter pie dish. The lip's a bit bigger, but the actual bit that we're going to fill is 23 centimetres, which is about 10 inches. So just a bit less, 9.5 inch. So that's the pie ready for the oven. Wants to go into a preheated oven at 350 Fahrenheit, which is 180 degrees Celsius. And we're going to be serving this with chips and mushy peas. So we'll pop it in the oven for about 35-40 minutes and we'll see what it looks like.